What is up, everyone? Alex Louis here. Today we're going to talk about throws, and we're going to still continue with the theme of exception handling, one of my favorites. The last video we went over throw, the throw keyword, and it allowed us to throw exceptions within methods. Now I'm going to go and cover throws, which is, it sounds similar, but it goes together with the throw keyword. So let's take a look at how this actually works. Okay, so suppose, just gonna go to new. Suppose um, you have a method here, right? This is let's just call this do stuff. Okay. Now this do stuff method, when we talk about throws, the throw statement, we can make this do stuff method throw various exceptions, and we can define that explicitly. So what I can do is I can say that this do stuff method is gonna throw, uh, let's just say illegal access exception, illegal, and I'm gonna show you an example in a bit. Exception, something like arithmetic overflow exception, and so on. I can list on my method any exceptions that I think potentially that this method could throw. As a developer of the method in this class, okay, so this method would be, so this is a method, and it would be inside some type of class. So we can say that this is a class test X, right? And any method that I define in my class, I can define it so that I can explicitly tell the compiler that it's going to throw one of these exceptions. Now, I don't have to, okay, I don't have to do that, but it is good practice if you are developing some type of application where you know in advance that it could potentially throw a couple of these exceptions. Now, this class and this method is the thrower. Basically, in exception handling you have two parties, right? One is the one that's going to call your method, right? And the other one is the receiver who's going to throw method exceptions, right? Um, so what would happen is we would define this method in this class, and we'd say, okay, this throws illegal access exception and arithmetic overflow exception and so on. And then anybody that's going to call this method has to wrap this method in a try catch block. Okay, we try we well we don't have to, but we should, because we know that it's throwing an exception. We're going to try and catch the exceptions that are available to us. So what does that give us? Well, so this is we can call this the exception thrower, right? So if this is the exception thrower in my code, okay, let's say I'm gonna call this, right? This is my let's just call this main. Okay, so this main is gonna call the do stuff class. Okay, because we're gonna call this do stuff class in our main, us as the caller. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily have to be main. I'm just using main as an example because we're usually using main.java as our kind of our test class that is always calling our other classes, right? So our main class would be our caller, and then we'd instantiate an object of whatever class we just did, which is the test class. When we call do stuff, what we do is we would try, and then we'd catch whatever exceptions this method is going to throw. So we can catch illegal access exception. and so on, right? And then we can have multiple catch blocks. So and then I can also catch anything further, such as whatever other exceptions that this was calling. So arithmetic overflow exception. Okay, arithmetic overflow exception. And if we think that we are going to run into a potential issue where we're not going to catch all the exceptions, you can always catch the generic exception in the end. So I do have the option of saying catch and then exception and so on. In this case, whenever we call a method that has these exceptions that it's throwing, what the compiler is going to do is first it's going to stop the flow of execution. So if we're somewhere in do stuff and there's an exception thrown, let's say it's an illegal access exception that's thrown, the compiler is going to stop and it's going to see if any of these catch statements matches the exception that it threw. So in this case, once it stops execution somewhere over here, then flow of control will now go to and check if it catches the illegal access or the arithmetic overflow. If it finds a match, it's going to transfer control to the catch statement and do what it needs to do. Okay. If there is no matching catch, then you're going to have the default exception handler and we're going to halt the program, which is not a good solution, right? So you want to catch, if it's going to throw individual exceptions, you want to catch as many as possible, because this way your program's not going to halt. And what you could do is whatever you do your code in this, say in this catch, then flow of execution will not halt. It's just going to continue to the next line, which is going to be whatever is after all these try catch blocks. So that's the difference between throws and throw. So now if I'm writing a method that throws exceptions, then I need to include the throw statement inside my method, something like throw new whatever exception. I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, so let's do this here. So I'm going to show you the test example class I wrote. Okay, so let's zoom in here a bit. So this test example class has a method called doStuff. And this doStuff method, I know that it's going to throw the illegal access exception, just as an example. So what I would do is I would say throws and then illegal access exception. By doing that, I'm letting the caller know that it could potentially throw this exception. So if I was the caller, right, I am going to catch this exception in my code. Okay, if it had multiple exceptions, so you could put multiple exceptions, so you can say arithmetic overflow exception. You can do that. Okay, and you can list them by commas. And if you list them by commas, then in your main code, and you'll see that in a bit, you're going to be able to catch these manually, okay, and handle them. Now, I'm not saying it's always going to throw this. So whenever you see a method that throws any type of exception, it does not mean it's always going to it's going to throw that exception. There's certain conditions that may throw the exception, but if it does everything accordingly, then it may never throw the exception. But you're just letting, as a developer and developer of this class, you're just letting everybody know that this is going to throw this exception potentially. Okay, potentially. It does not necessarily always going to throw this. So you'll see that a lot in the Java classes. When you look at the Java documentation, you're going to see that some methods are prone to throwing exceptions. So you, as yourself, can handle those exception handling, and you can catch them. Okay, so this is a simple method where I'm just printing out inside the doStuff, right? I'm printing that out, and then I'm going to deliberately throw I'm going to say throw new illegal access exception. So you see that this is what we covered in the last video. So when we do a throw, we are throwing a new illegal access. Now these are already existing exceptions that exist, existing exception classes that exist in Java. Okay. In the next video, I'm going to teach you how to create your own exception class. Okay, and that's very easy. So I'm going to throw my illegal access exception, which exists in the java.lang package, right? So I'm going to do throw new. So what I'm telling the compiler is I'm going to want you to instantiate an object of illegal access exception class. Okay, and then I just put throw new exception. We talked about this with the constructor in the last video. Okay, now one thing I do want to mention is when you throw an exception, whatever you throw has to be a of throwable class. So, or a subclass. It has to be a subclass of throwable. So we're talking about inheritance here. So if when you create your own exceptions, okay, you have to extend throwable. You have to inherit from throwable, or it could be a type of throwable, okay? Or else this is going to give you a compiler error. It's not going to let you compile, okay? So I throw that. Now, as the caller, okay, as the caller, let's look at what I've done here. So I'm wrapping the instantiation in a try block, right? And then when I call this eDoStuff method, I know that I'm going to catch the illegal access exception because that's what it's throwing. Okay, so you'll see here, and it's always going to throw it, right? Because there's no logic that says it should not throw it. I'm always going to throw it in this particular example. So when it throws the exception, control is going to go into the catch statement. It's going to create an object of the illegal access exception class, and then here I can just handle it, and I'll just say caught in main. So let me run that. So let's look at the steps. So over here we said inside do stuff, right? So when we call, we are printing this out here, right? Inside do stuff, and then what happened? This method threw the illegal access exception, and what happened here is that I caught it, right? And because I caught it, I printed it out, caught in main. Okay, caught in main. Okay, I did want to show you one thing in terms of when we do exception handling and how this whole chain works. So let's say I didn't want to print out my own message. I wanted to rely on the actual method's exception message. And the way I would do that is first, I don't touch anything in test message do stuff method, because remember when we did the system.out.println, we're just printing out our own exception message. But let's rely on this message, right? Because this is what it's throwing. It's throwing a new illegal access exception. So how would I do that? So what I'm going to do is, because it creates an instance of this object, and we instantiate the illegal access exception object in the test example class inside the method, right, using throw, right? We did throw new, so that instantiates a new object. And now we get the message from the constructor. So what is this message from the constructor? It is this thing here. So what I do is I get the message, I store it in my string variable, and then I print that out. So if I run this real quick, you'll see that now it's printing out the constructor message through the exception. So now this is printing out. So that's another little caveat that I wanted to make sure that you understood. Okay, so this didn't really get lost in space. What happens is in the first example, I am just printing out my new message, and I'm suppressing it because I'm not getting the message. But the message is there. The message is there. You can catch it, and you can store it somewhere you want, and you can print it out. You can do whatever you want. Send it somewhere. Okay. Okay. So that's the way the throws keyword works. And there's a difference between throws and throw, and now you know the difference, right? But they go hand in hand, right? So when you use throws, you have to use it inside a method, and then you would list the exceptions that method is going to throw. So throws whatever exception, and you can list the exceptions that you want to throw for that method. Okay. All right. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you've gotten more familiar with how throw and throws works. And on the next video, we'll talk about creating your own custom exception class. And then that should be it for exception handling basics.